Hi, it's Brenda with OrganiLock. Today we're going to talk about using an EC meter, a meter that measures the electrical conductivity in your soil. That's the science. That's all I'm going to give you. That's not my thing. I do know that these little probes on the end are the electrodes and they measure the flow of ions. They go back and forth, and that is the electrical flow. That is also the way to measure the amount of nutrition in your soil. So that's what we use this EC meter for. This one happens to be made by Blue Lab, and it's called a truncheon. If you can see that. It's called a truncheon, and it's available online. You can get it even from Amazon. Costs around $100, and it is well worth it. It may seem like a large amount to spend on a tool, but if you're an avid gardener especially, this is a tool that you really shouldn't live without. You need to know what your soil has in it, where you're starting before you add nutrition, and we recommend it highly. So let's move on. I'm going to measure the first, like I said, you have to know where you start. So I'm going to use peat moss. We know that peat moss is a substrate that's in a lot of our soil mixes, and it by itself has no nutrition in it, okay? It is a blank slate. So we're starting with a blank slate today. I'm going to use some water because water is essential in order for those ions to flow. We're going to want to have enough water so that it leaves a little bit of a puddle, just kind of make it a little bit soupy. And always when you're testing, make sure that you start slow and add more, okay? So if you over water, you can't pour it back out because that pours out some of the nutrition and that will mess up your test. Same thing when you're adding nutrition, you want to start with little bits. It's better to start and add more than to get too much and then have too much in your soil that you can't remove. So this is what it looks like. This is about the consistency you want. You can see that there's a little bit of water sitting on the top that makes it enough of a puddle to measure. So it's very complicated. You ready? Stick it in the water and watch for the lights. No lights, no nutrition. Okay, so this shows that we have a blank slate. We like to shoot for, if you're making a mix that's for very young plants, let's say even seed starting especially, you're going to want to stick with like a 2 parts per million or 200 parts per million, which is this lowest light here. If you're going to make a mix or you're trying to boost your soil for the season to grow all season long, you're going to want to shoot for more 300 to 400 parts per million, depending on how heavy of a feeder your plant is. So I just put a teeny pinch in there, and we're going to see that it doesn't take much, but again, I'm trying to get the point across that you add a little, then you add more. Don't just go dump it in because the bag says, oh, well, add this much. We can only tell you the average of what you should be adding, but we don't know where you're starting, so that's why this is so important to measure first, to know where you're starting. Okay, we've already come up to the 200 parts per million here. You can see it flashing back and forth between 1 and 2, just with that tiny little pinch. The longer you let it sit, the higher the reading's going to go. So if it's flashing between the two, you know for sure you're going to get that higher reading once it actually has time to settle in and to get the nutrition flowing. So we're going to add a little bit more. I'm going to rinse off in between. One other thing that you need to think about when you are doing your testing is a lot of our water from our tap has minerals added to it, and those minerals have salts in them, and salt is a great conductor of electricity. So if you have some tap water that has salt in it, you are going to find that you're going to have a little bit higher reading. It also will throw your reading off. So you can test your water first. I'm using bottled water, and you can see here there's nothing in it, no salts at all. So I know that I have an exact reading in my soils. All right, watching the lights again. Here we are bouncing at 2 to 3 already with one more little pinch. And if I let this sit for a while, we're going to see that reading go up. So I'm going to let it sit here while I tell you again, soil food, feed the soil. This 2-pound bag will cover 100 square feet if you're doing in-ground growing. This 6-pound bag, 300 square feet, okay? It's very potent. It doesn't take a whole lot. If you're doing raised beds or if you're doing in-ground, you can add this in, you can add it in what it says on the bag, or you can test first, which is the safest thing to do. You can rehab your pots. You can use it on house plants. You can also use this not just before you plant, but you can also use it as a top dress once you have planted. If you feel like your plants are needing a little boost because they're looking kind of peaked and they're feeding really heavy and they've used up a lot of nutrition, you can take this and sprinkle it on the soil, scruff it in a little bit, pour the water on again. You've got to have the water in order for the product to activate, to wake up those microbes that are in it and get the soil flowing with your nutrition. So you can see now we're starting to bounce between 300 and 400 parts per million because it's been sitting. So a little bit goes a long way. Like I said, you can use it in ground before you plant, or you can use it as a top dress after you plant. But the most important thing is see where you're starting. See what it is before you put it in so that you know exactly where you start and you can have the best chance of having the best nutrition for those plants. We want you to be successful, so that's why we recommend this EC meter when you are gardening. All right, so that pretty much sums it up. So I guess the main thing you need to remember is it's simple. Feed the soil.